The fine was folded neatly under my windshield wiper like some kind of passive-aggressive love letter, bright orange paper, bold black letters. Community, noise violation, $150. At first, I honestly thought somebody was messing with me because it was 2:37 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, middle of summer, birds chirping, lawnmowers running, Amazon trucks backing up every 10 seconds like they were invading the neighborhood. Then I looked down at the description line and just stood there staring at it for a second longer than I probably should have. Excessive screaming and disruptive behavior originating from front lawn area. You want to know what the disruptive behavior was? My 8-year-old daughter Avery laughing while chasing bubbles in the yard. That was it. No music, no party, no fireworks, no barking dogs. Just a little girl laughing too loud for one very bitter man named Grant Holloway. Now Grant wasn't just some random grumpy neighbor with too much free time and a blood pressure problem. He was the HOA board president, and he carried that title around like he'd been personally appointed by the governor to protect America from children enjoying sunlight. Every single interaction with that man felt like you accidentally walked into a courtroom you didn't know you were on trial in. He had that smug little smile too, the kind that only appears on people who enjoy correcting others publicly. And the worst part? He didn't even mail the fine. He walked it over himself. My daughter told me later he stood at the edge of the lawn with his arms crossed while she was still playing, waiting for her to notice him. Then he said, "Sweetheart, your screaming is disturbing the peace of the community." Disturbing the peace from an 8-year-old with bubbles. Avery came inside crying, cheeks red, clutching the stupid orange paper in both hands like she'd committed a crime, and she asked me something that honestly hit harder than the fine itself. She said, "Dad, why do adults hate when kids have fun?" Man, I didn't have a clean answer for that one. I wish I did. I wish I could tell you I gave some perfect movie speech about kindness and patience and how some people are just unhappy. But the truth is I just sat there at the kitchen table staring at this ridiculous violation notice while my daughter quietly wiped tears off her face with her sleeve. And the more I thought about it, the more something started bothering me. Because this wasn't the first complaint Grant had made. Not even close. Over the previous few months, he'd become obsessed with policing families in the neighborhood. Kids riding scooters too late, violation. Chalk drawings on the sidewalk, violation. A soccer ball hitting a shared fence, violation. My neighbor Tasha got fined twice in 1 week because her twin boys were playing tag near the mailbox cluster after dinner. Total damage to the community? Apparently $300 worth. Meanwhile, every Friday night, Grant transformed his backyard into what sounded like a divorced 45-year-old nightclub owner's midlife crisis. Bass shaking windows until after midnight, drunk adults screaming over classic rock playlists, patio lights blasting through people's bedroom curtains, and somehow, magically, none of that ever counted as a violation. Funny how that works. Rules for thee, but not for me. That's the thing about power-tripping HOA people. Eventually, they stop hiding the hypocrisy because they get addicted to the feeling of control. And Grant loved control. You could see it in the way he talked to people, slow and condescending, like every conversation was secretly a warning. One afternoon, I watched him lecture an elderly woman for leaving her trash bin visible 30 minutes after pickup. 30 minutes. The woman was probably 75 years old and apologizing while he stood there nodding like he was negotiating a hostage release. Then the next day, I drove past his house and saw beer bottles piled beside his garage after one of his parties. No citation, no warning, nothing. And once you notice that pattern, you can't unsee it anymore. He wasn't enforcing rules equally. He was targeting people he thought wouldn't fight back, mostly families with young kids. Because parents are busy, exhausted, distracted, and honestly most people just pay the fine to avoid drama. That's the psychological game right there. Make the punishment annoying enough that people comply, but not outrageous enough that they hire a lawyer. Grant understood that system perfectly. What he didn't understand was me. See, I work in commercial loan underwriting for a regional bank outside Charlotte, and my entire job revolves around spotting inconsistencies people hope nobody notices. Missing documentation, suspicious payment patterns, unexplained financial gaps. After a while, your brain just starts connecting dots automatically. You stop taking things at face value. And once I started paying attention to Grant, little things began standing out everywhere. The constant selective enforcement, the intimidation tactics, the strange confidence he had every time someone challenged him publicly. It didn't feel like regular HOA nonsense anymore. It felt calculated. So instead of arguing with him, which honestly is exactly what guys like Grant want, I got quiet. Quiet people make dangerous observers. The next Friday night, when his usual backyard circus started up around 9:30, I sat on my back patio with a borrowed decibel meter from our facilities department at work. I remember looking at the screen the first time the reading jumped over 80 and actually laughing to myself because the official HOA noise limit after 10 p.m. was 65 decibels. Grant's backyard sounded like a Buffalo Wild Wings during a playoff game. I started documenting everything. Dates, times, recordings, witness statements from neighbors, screenshots from the HOA bylaws. Every violation logged carefully into a spreadsheet like I was building a case file. Because in a weird way, I was. And the craziest part? Once neighbors realized somebody was finally paying attention, they started talking. Quietly at first, then nonstop. Stories about intimidation, selective fines, weird board meetings, missing maintenance requests. One guy told me Grant once threatened to fine him over Christmas decorations that were apparently too emotionally aggressive. I swear to God those were the exact words. Emotionally aggressive Christmas lights. At that point I realized this wasn't just a grumpy retiree abusing HOA rules because he hated noise. No, this was a man who had gotten drunk on tiny amounts of unchecked authority, and people like that almost always make one fatal mistake eventually. They start believing they're untouchable. And once somebody believes that, they stop being careful. Now before I keep going, let me explain something about HOAs because if you've never lived under one, it probably sounds insane that a grown man can fine a child for laughing in her own yard. But according to standard procedure, HOA boards actually do have pretty broad authority when homeowners sign community agreements, especially around nuisance, violations, and noise complaints. The problem is, those rules are intentionally vague. Disturbing the peace, excessive noise, disruptive behavior. Those phrases sound official, but they leave a ton of room for interpretation, and that's exactly where people like Grant thrive. From a legal perspective, selective enforcement is where things get dangerous for an HOA board. Because once you punish one homeowner for behavior you routinely ignore from another homeowner, especially if there's a visible pattern, you start opening the door to claims of harassment, discrimination, abuse of authority, even financial misconduct if fines are being weaponized improperly. And trust me, most HOA presidents don't think that far ahead because they assume nobody's documenting anything. That's the psychological trap. Guys like Grant become addicted to compliance, not respect. There's a huge difference. Respect comes from fairness. Compliance comes from fear and exhaustion. He didn't actually want a peaceful neighborhood. He wanted a neighborhood where nobody challenged him. And once a person gets comfortable controlling people through intimidation, they usually escalate little by little until they cross a line they can't uncross. The lesson here is, small power almost always reveals big character. Give somebody authority over parking spots, lawn height, mailbox colors, and suddenly you find out exactly who they've always wanted to be underneath. And honestly, the second Grant decided to publicly humiliate an 8-year-old child instead of acting like a normal adult, he stopped being an HOA president in my eyes. He became a problem that eventually somebody was going to solve. By the time October rolled around, I had 6 full weeks of documentation sitting in a folder on my desktop labeled Grant. 41 separate noise violations tied directly to his property, recordings from multiple weekends, decibel readings ranging from 74 all the way up to 91 after quiet hours started, timestamps, photos, written statements from neighbors. Honestly, it looked less like HOA drama and more like a federal investigation into a suburban margarita cartel. And the wild part was Grant had absolutely no idea any of this was happening because people like him never imagined they're being watched the same way they watch everybody else. They assume they're the camera, never the target. So while he kept handing out fines to parents over sidewalk chalk and basketballs, I just kept collecting information quietly, patiently, letting him build the rope himself. Then something happened that shifted this entire thing from petty neighborhood revenge into something way bigger. One Tuesday night, I was digging through publicly available HOA financial disclosures online, mostly because by then I didn't trust anything connected to that board anymore, and I noticed several maintenance payments authorized under Grant's approval signature. At first, nothing looked crazy. landscaping invoices, sprinkler repairs, pool maintenance, normal suburban money pit stuff. Then one charge caught my attention. $4,870 paid to a company called Green Valley Exterior Solutions. Sounds legit, right? Except there was no business registration attached. No address. No contractor license. No website. Nothing. I searched county records 3 times thinking maybe I spelled it wrong. Still nothing. Which immediately made my underwriting brain start twitching. Because fake vendors are one of the oldest financial games in existence. Create a vague company name. Push invoices through an organization nobody audits carefully. Siphon money slowly enough that nobody notices. Now, I'm not saying Grant was running some criminal empire out of a gated subdivision with matching mailboxes and seasonal wreath competitions, but I am saying the math stopped making sense. So I dug deeper. Turns out multiple homeowners had submitted complaints over unfinished maintenance projects that were supposedly already paid for, according to HOA records. One family complained the playground repairs never happened. Another asked why drainage work listed as completed still hadn't even started. And every road led back to approvals signed by Grant. That's when I knew 2 things for sure. First, this man had gotten way too comfortable abusing authority. Second, the upcoming annual HOA meeting was about to become the worst night of his life. I spent the next week preparing like I was building a courtroom presentation. Printed packets for every homeowner. Color-coded timelines. Noise logs. HOA bylaw excerpts highlighted in yellow. Financial summaries. Vendor discrepancies. I even included screenshots of the actual noise ordinance language because I already knew Grant's favorite defense was going to be rules are rules. Fine, let's talk about the rules. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed tighter than I'd ever seen it. Usually those HOA meetings are just 10 exhausted homeowners arguing about parking lines while somebody coughs near stale cookies. Not this one. Word had spread that people were finally pushing back against Grant, and neighbors showed up looking weirdly excited, like they were attending a live episode of suburban courtroom TV. Grant sat at the front folding his arms the second he saw me walk in carrying boxes of documents. You could literally watch the irritation hit his face in real time. This meeting is for official HOA matters only, he snapped before things even started. I remember smiling and saying, "Perfect. That's exactly why I'm here." The room got real quiet after that. And here's the thing people misunderstand about confrontations. Yelling is overrated. Calmness terrifies guilty people way more because calm people usually brought evidence. Once homeowner comments opened, I stood up, handed stacks of packets down each row, then waited. No dramatic speech. No screaming match. Just silence while pages flipped. Honestly, that silence was louder than any argument could have been. You could hear people muttering under their breath as they looked through the violations. 41 documented noise complaints tied to Grant's address. 0 citations issued. Meanwhile, 6 separate families had been fined a combined total of nearly $2,300 over children playing outside during daylight hours. One older guy actually took his glasses off and said, "You've got to be kidding me." Then came the financial pages. And that's where the energy in the room changed completely. Confusion turned into anger fast. Homeowners started cross-checking the payment records against unfinished neighborhood projects they'd personally complained about for months. One woman near the back raised her hand and asked why the HOA paid nearly $5,000 to a contractor nobody could verify existed. Grant immediately cut in, voice sharp. "These accusations are inappropriate and potentially defamatory." There it was, the panic crack in his voice. First time all night, he sounded nervous. I looked right at him and said, "According to the county business registry, the vendor doesn't legally exist. According to HOA payment records, they received community funds anyway. So either documentation is missing or something worse is happening." Man, you could feel the tension physically at that point. Like the oxygen got heavier in the room. Grant stood up so fast his chair slammed backward into the wall. "This is a personal attack," he barked, face turning red. And I'll be honest, the old me probably would have matched his energy. But by then I realized something important. Guys like Grant survive through emotional intimidation. They want chaos because chaos protects them. So instead I stayed calm and hit him with the one thing he couldn't control, procedure. "No," I said. "This is documentation." That line landed hard. A couple people actually nodded immediately because deep down, everybody there already knew what kind of man he was. They'd just been waiting for someone else to say it out loud first. Then the floodgates opened. Neighbors started sharing their own experiences one after another. Selective fines, threats, intimidation, ignored complaints, missing maintenance requests. It became less of an HOA meeting and more like a community intervention for a guy addicted to power. One father talked about his autistic son being fined over noise complaints during a birthday party. A widow explained how Grant threatened legal action because her grass got too high while she was in the hospital. Every story made the room colder. You could actually see people reevaluating years of interactions in real time. And Grant, he kept shrinking. That's the strange thing about bullies. They look enormous right up until the moment fear changes direction. Then suddenly they just look small. Eventually, one board member, a retired teacher named Ellen, quietly asked for a formal vote to remove Grant as HOA president pending investigation into the financial records. 3 hands went up immediately. Then almost every hand in the room followed. Grant looked stunned, like he genuinely believed consequences were things that only happened to other people. The motion passed before the meeting even adjourned. Just like that, years of control disappeared in under 10 minutes. But somehow, that still wasn't the craziest part. Because 2 weeks later, I walked into work Monday morning, coffee in hand, opened my underwriting queue, and nearly laughed out loud. Sitting right there in my pending files was a mortgage refinance application under the name Grant Holloway. You ever have one of those moments where life feels scripted? Like the universe got a little too creative? Yeah, that was one of them. Now, before anybody gets the wrong idea, I didn't have the authority to personally destroy his application out of revenge, and honestly, that would have been illegal as hell. But here's what I did know. After the HOA meeting, multiple homeowners had already submitted formal complaints to the county regarding the questionable vendor payments. And once those complaints entered the system, compliance reviews automatically flagged associated financial records connected to Grant. By the time his refinance file reached our department, internal risk assessment had already marked it for enhanced investigation. That meant extra scrutiny on income verification, debt exposure, financial disclosures, all of it. And once underwriters start finding inconsistencies, the whole process slows to a crawl. Missing documentation becomes a problem. Unexplained transactions become a problem. Pending investigations become very big problems. I opened the file, reviewed the notes, and there it was in plain English from compliance review. Application suspended pending clarification of reported financial irregularities. A week later, the refinance was officially denied. No dramatic courtroom scene. No revenge speech. Just paperwork. Cold, boring, devastating paperwork. Honestly, that's the part that stuck with me most. Grant spent years acting like power meant humiliating people face to face, making parents uncomfortable, making children cry, making neighbors feel small. But in the end, what actually took him down wasn't yelling or threats or public humiliation. It was records, dates, documentation, quiet accountability. The same rules he weaponized against everybody else finally circled back around on him. And the last time I saw Grant in the neighborhood, he looked different. Smaller somehow. Not because he lost money or status, but because for the first time people weren't afraid of him anymore. Nobody avoided eye contact. Nobody rushed conversations when he walked by. The spell was gone. And man, once fear disappears, guys like that have absolutely nothing left. For a while after everything happened, Avery kept asking me if Mr. Holloway was still mad at us. That question honestly stayed with me longer than the HOA drama itself, because kids notice tension way more than adults think they do. They may not understand politics or neighborhood power games or financial misconduct, but they absolutely understand when somebody makes them feel small for existing. And the truth is, that was the part that bothered me most from the beginning. Not the money, not even the hypocrisy. It was watching a grown man look at a laughing child and decide she was the problem. That tells you everything you need to know about a person right there. Because healthy adults don't go to war with children. Broken ones do. And look, I know some people hearing this story are probably thinking, dude, why not just move? Trust me, we considered it. But the lesson here is, bad people get stronger when decent people quietly leave instead of pushing back. Communities only work when fairness applies to everybody equally, including the people enforcing the rules. Otherwise, it stops being a neighborhood and starts becoming a tiny dictatorship with landscaping requirements. According to standard procedure, HOA boards are supposed to protect property values, maintain shared spaces, and create consistency within a community. In theory, that sounds reasonable. But the second authority loses transparency and accountability, things get ugly fast. And honestly, this goes way beyond HOAs. You see this dynamic everywhere. Workplaces, schools, local governments, even families. One person gets a little unchecked control, everybody else gets tired of confrontation. Then slowly the entire environment starts revolving around avoiding that one difficult personality. This is a psychological trap communities fall into all the time. People convince themselves it's easier to stay quiet than create conflict, but silence has a cost too. Every ignored abuse teaches the bully they were right to keep going. Every avoided confrontation transfers power little by little until somebody finally reaches their breaking point. And most of the time, bullies don't collapse because one brave hero suddenly appears. They collapse because ordinary people slowly realize they're not alone anymore. That's exactly what happened at our HOA meeting. The moment one person spoke up calmly with evidence, everybody else finally felt safe enough to tell the truth too. That's why documentation matters so much. Emotions come and go. Stories get dismissed. But patterns? Patterns are hard to argue with. From a legal perspective, the biggest mistake Grant made wasn't being rude or arrogant. It was selective enforcement combined with financial inconsistency. That combination destroys credibility because once people believe rules are being applied unfairly, every decision starts looking suspicious. And once financial trust disappears inside an HOA, panic spreads quickly because homeowners realize they're not just dealing with annoying leadership anymore. They're dealing with potential misuse of community money. But if I'm being completely honest, there's another lesson here too, one I didn't fully understand until afterward. Revenge feels satisfying for about 5 minutes. Accountability feels different. Cleaner somehow. I didn't win because Grant suffered. I won because my daughter learned something important while watching all of this unfold. She learned that unfair people are not unstoppable. She learned that staying calm is sometimes more powerful than screaming back. And most importantly, she learned that adults should protect children from bitterness, not project bitterness onto them. A couple months after the whole thing ended, I was sitting outside while Avery played in the yard again. Same driveway, same bubbles, same loud, unstoppable laugh echoing through the neighborhood. And for one tiny second, I caught myself listening nervously, waiting for another complaint, another confrontation, another orange paper under my windshield. But nothing happened. Just kids riding bikes, dogs barking, sprinklers running, people talking on porches, normal life. The kind of life Grant spent years trying to control instead of enjoy. And honestly, that might be the saddest part of this whole story. Some people become so obsessed with managing everyone else's happiness that they completely lose the ability to experience their own. So if there's any takeaway from all this, it's probably this. Don't underestimate quiet people. Don't mistake patience for weakness. And never build your identity around controlling others because eventually somebody will start paying attention. And when they do, the paperwork usually tells the truth louder than emotions ever can. Anyway, I've got to ask, what would you have done the moment a grown man told your child their laughter was disturbing the peace? Because I promise you, a lot of parents in that neighborhood had opinions after this happened, and some of them probably would have handled it way less peacefully than I did.